Hey everyone, my name's Carell, and today we're going to be taking a look through the technology of Losantville. This particular map did win the Ingenious Contest Award in the latest Builders competition for the month of July, so we're just going to take a look through this map and see what makes it work, what makes it tick, what makes all of the trap combinations and setups do their thing. This is going to be a little bit more of a freeform video, so I apologize if I ramble a little bit here and there, but we're just going to take a look through each and every single little piece of technology in this particular map. So starting with the exterior, I haven't put a whole lot of effort into this. This is pretty much just gray unpainted concrete. Nothing real fancy out here. The only thing here is the blue lines leading to the tombs. Those are all marked out. And of course over here we've got a hollow cube. That is a second wave hollow cube just letting you out from the gen mat. So going on to the actual part of the map that matters, the first thing we've got up here is this corrosive cube. Now this corrosive cube actually serves two purposes here, and we'll get into the second one later, but the first one is actually that we have a bolt shot trap over there that can fire down and around this corner. So if you try and back up and escape from this bolt shot trap and you go straight back, these corrosive cubes let it through. If you try and go just one block down over here, this corrosive cube will let one of those bolts through, and it will most likely kill you unless you back all the way down around this corner. So that's the first bit of tech there. Alright, so the first trap we see on the inside here is this impaler. This is just a unrelenting self-destruct impaler here, and it really serves one or two purposes. The first thing is, if you know anything about me or the trap setups that I tend to like tech-heavy setups, and an exploding impaler around this many corrosive cubes is going to start tweaking people's nose a little bit, right? They're going to look at this and think, what did that set off? Well, the answer is nothing. It's a red herring. This particular one is just there to A, make you let your guard down, B, it will help you kind of establish that there might be something else going on here, which in this particular case there isn't, but there's, it's kind of a warning that there's something else happening. And if you just rush past this over in this direction, there's a high potential that there's nasty stuff going on up here. So if you try and back out after triggering this trap without just letting it go off, then you might want to back down here, and that's not going to be good for your health. So it serves a couple of purposes there. It's not a hugely effective trap. I've not seen many people die to it. If I turn on the all here, you can see a few people have died to this here and there, but it's really not intended as the primary means of killing anyone in this particular area. So moving on here, the next trap you'll see is this incinerator. This incinerator serves two purposes. Yes, it shoots flames down this hallway, and it does a pretty good job at that. If you try and jump over it, you've got corrosive cubes to contend with. If you try and slip over to this side, then you can't deal as well with the bomb trap up there. And this thing has you pinned in a corner, so yeah, it's a little bit risky. However, shooting this has its own set of risks associated with it. If you are using a demolition cannon is really, really good at breaking complicated trap setups. It will very happily accidentally disable a lot of trap setups that I would prefer not be disabled. So this slope here into this corrosive cube pit accomplishes a couple of things for me. For one, it's nearly impossible for the grenade to roll down here and explode on this trap, which is important because this trap does other things as well. For another, the grenade may or may not reveal that hollow cube, but what it will almost certainly do is fall into this corrosive cube pit. This thing is 3 corrosive cubes deep. I think a really good player might still be able to get their ammunition back from the bottom of that, but they certainly can't do it by going back outside. This area back out here is walled off to such a degree that once that ammo goes down in that pit, you are not getting it back. That will come in handy use later as well, but for now, the demolition cannon ammo, regardless of how far up this slope you shoot it, will roll down into this pit, and you will lose it. So if anyone comes in here with a demo cannon, if they try and go this direction right off the bat, again, there are 2 directions over here, but if they go this direction, which is the most tempting one since you have the trap firing at you from the start, you will lose your ammo and it will not go well for you. So the next thing you'll encounter, of course, is this bolt shot trap. This is a relentless hunter bolt shot trap. And usually what happens when that starts going off is that people will either try and rush forward or rush backwards. If they try and rush forward, they're going to trigger this hollow cube in that bolt shot. And if they panic and do the wrong thing and go up, well, this thing's still firing, it can probably shoot them. And if they panic and run over here and drop into the corrosive cube pit, well, of course they're still dead. If they panic and run over here, well, that bolt shot has a line of sight all the way up here. So there's really no safe spot once you get all the way up to this wall. And if this thing has triggered and you don't destroy it, you're going to have a bad day. However, if you trigger this thing and back out, what's happening here is the bolts are firing through this corrosive cube and they're causing splatter. This also happens if you get up against this wall here. The bolts from the bolt shot here will hit the corrosive cube in the absence of homing, and they will cause splatter, and that splatter will come out of this face of the cube, and it comes out straight, which usually leads to it landing right around here and making this entire corner unsafe to land on, which even further enhances the tendency of people to grapple up to this wall and sit there and get shot by that bolt shot or otherwise captured by the traps. So it's a very deadly corner if you go rushing into it, and unless you go really, really, really fast through here, fast enough to avoid all of the traps, you're going to have a bad time unless you're using a Nautilus shield. That's pretty much it for that little corner there. Oh, we do have a bomb trap up here. And this is actually a bomb splitter, but it's a relatively deceptive one. The bombs from up here drop down this corner. Well, this corner here, if we look at this, we'll see a little better on the line of sight. Let's actually go up in that corner. And we have about half the bombs getting split off by this thing and rolling over there. We have half the bombs coming down here. Well, it's about a 50-50 chance as to whether the bomb bounces off this edge of this particular prism block and just gets trapped around here, bouncing back and forth between the prism and the wall, or if it hits this block. If it hits this block, it starts rolling out this way. However, that's not the end of it. The bomb also has a 50-50 chance of impacting this surface, in which case it will roll across here. Now, this is where things get a little bit interesting. If this bomb trap is allowed to go off, it has a high chance of killing both this plasma sentinel and this piston. I don't particularly care about that, and we'll get to that, the why of that in just a moment, but it also has a small chance of coming over here. If it comes over this direction, it's not really going to do anything. It's not going to blow anything up that matters. It is very unlikely to go bouncing out towards this impaler. It's much more likely just to get funneled down into these corrosive cubes. This corrosive cube here is both opaque and splatter, and this one down here is also opaque. So the raider, if they back up from that bomb trap, this is right in their path of where they would back up. So even if I don't get that roughly 25% chance of a bomb hitting this surface and rolling out towards the entrance, I still have about 50% of the bombs, which should, in theory, get channeled down through this corrosive cube and potentially through this one as well. If that fails, and the bombs don't go off in the right spot, as long as they touch this corrosive cube from the top surface, they will trigger a splatter effect. And the splatter orb, since the bombs come through the top surface of the cube, will go straight up from the surface of that cube, and then it will come straight back down and make the rest of this surface corrosive and basically uninhabitable. So even if you manage to survive the bombs via shield, you are not safe. You still have to get out of there because if you don't, that corrosion or that acid is probably still going to kill you. So it's kind of a secondary trap that is designed to hopefully catch some shield users. It's not going to catch all of them, especially a fully kitted out Nautilus user is not really going to die to that, but it's something to maybe make you think a little bit. Moving forward a little bit here, we have this hollow cube. If you trigger this hollow cube, this bolt shot will trigger. There are no ifs, ands, ors, or buts about that. If one triggers, the other triggers. What most people do when they hear that trigger is they spin and look this way. Well, the bolt shot is actually down, so they think, oh, well, I don't have enough time to adjust my aim and shoot it. Most of them won't. Some raiders have excellent reaction times. They're not going to get caught by this. Only so much I can do about that here. They're just going to shoot the bolt shot, and that's that. Well, most people aren't going to do that. They're going to back up. And if they back up to here, the bolt shot fires. Okay, that's no big deal. The bolts just whiz past. And the bolt shot trap is unmodded, so that's the end of it, right? Nothing else happens. Well, We'll get into the effects of that later, but there are other things that trigger based on this bolt shot trap, so that's good to remember. This bolt shot trap triggering and remaining undestroyed is a good thing for us, so I wanted to hide that down there as much as possible. Moving on, we've got up here a hollow cube here. And this hollow cube is mostly just there for visual obstruction and to make a potential shortcut path a little less obvious, but it is Eagle Eye as well as Picture Perfect here, and that means that it will trigger up to 3 blocks in distance away. That means if you step on this tile anywhere, this hollow cube will trigger. If you are right about here and your head is poking up over that ledge, this hollow cube will trigger. Well, what's going on back here is we've got a laser trap all the way back in the corner there. And these architectural pieces center that laser. So if you run all the way up here and then run off to the side, well, it's still more or less centered. It's going to fire a little bit off to the right and down, but for the most part, the laser beam is still relatively centered. And that's important with this block here, because this block then deflects the laser this way. So if I run up here and just run to the right, the laser is going to bounce off this surface and follow me. And usually what will happen there is it will bounce around in this area a little bit. So it's not always going to bounce forward, it's not always going to bounce backwards. Sometimes it might bounce up or down after this point. It really depends on how fast the radar runs around the corner and what angle they take. But in general, it's going to do something interesting. Now, as for what that something interesting is, well, also that goes back to this bolt shot down there in the corner. This hollow cube is very important. This is a picture-perfect masquerade hollow cube. And I really want that to trigger. So what happens here if you come up this left angle and the laser locks onto you and you're just peeking around that corner looking at, say, that plasma sentinel, knowing that you have plenty of time to get out of the way before that laser trap fires, it's not really a threat to you, right? Well, the laser trap will actually go along this edge and hit this top surface of this corner and bounce upwards through this hollow cube. So even if you don't trigger the hollow cube and you're just over in this corner and you haven't actually stepped on that block, and then you decide, well, the laser's going off, I don't want to get up there with that plasma sentinel and the laser, I'm just going to back down here for a second. Well, laser goes off, it'll bounce up there, it'll bounce right back down because that's a flat surface, and you get about 2.5 seconds of laser beam fire going up through that hollow cube. Alternatively, if you trigger this thing, those bolts will hit this hollow cube up here, and it pops the hollow cube. As I've mentioned, this is a picture-perfect masquerade hollow cube, and up here we have a crowd of guards. So your first instinct on seeing a crowd of guards up here is that, oh, the hollow cube's going to pop and they're going to drop down here. Yes and no. One of these guards, the cannonback, will in fact drop down here, specifically onto this corner block. Corner block will not allow him to path anywhere else, so he will just sit up here and shoot at anything that comes within his cone of fire. Well, that happens to include both of the pathways up to this corner, as well as the pathway onwards, barring that shortcut over there. So this cannonback then has very good sight lines and is able to see a lot of things, which makes him kind of a big threat. He doesn't drop down immediately, though. He waits about 3 seconds, and there's a couple of reasons for that. The first reason is because over here we have this laser trap. That might be what triggered this thing, or it might have been triggered by that bolt shot down there. In either of those two cases, the laser trap or the bolt shot trap could kill the cannonback if he drops through that hollow cube too early. Or rather, if he drops through as soon as the hollow cube is triggered. So he waits 3 seconds and then drops, which just happens to sync him up perfectly with one of the Ravagers here. We've got a Reflex Manipulation and Deadman Switch Ravager. And we have over here, I believe it's actually this guy. No, I'm incorrect there. It is this guy. We have a Reflex Manipulation and Bloodlust Enforcer. And what those two do is they walk over this corner. Since the hollow cube with Masquerade on it has very slightly larger size than its actual hitbox, that means that you can just kind of walk over the corner of this hollow cube just a teeny tiny little bit, and it will actually stop the guard's movement until the hollow cube is popped. So those two patrol over here, and then they drop down onto this block. And then, facing this way, that's very important, they back over here and drop down onto this ramp. That accomplishes a couple of things. You'll remember that one of those had Deadman Switch on it, and the Deadman Switch guard will potentially drive the Raider off of this path over here. So if the Raider just backed away from, say, that bolt shot triggering, and then cautiously pokes his head back around the corner, it takes about 3 seconds from when that holocube popped, as I mentioned, to when the guards drop in, and the Cannonback and the Ravager and Enforcer drop in pretty much simultaneously. Well, the Ravager and Enforcer aren't armored, and the Enforcer is much less of a threat than the Ravager. Therefore, most Raiders will target the Ravager first, and they'll shoot the Ravager. Well, that triggers the Ravager's Deadman switch, and that starts rolling down this hill. Importantly, the guards tend to drop on this side of the block over here. So they have a longer path there. They rarely roll into this corrosive cube before the Deadman switch detonates, which is really what you want. So the Ravager starts sliding down this hill and will detonate if the Raider only backed a little ways around the corner and kill them. The Enforcer here aggroes and has plenty of time to charge up a shot if they're not killed immediately, but they'll also kind of tend to drive the Raider back around this corner. That's very important. Also, it functions as a secondary ammo trap. If you fire at those guards with a Volt Lancer or a plasma crossbow, though really what I'm interested in here is the Volt Lancer shots, if you shoot those guards with the Volt Lancer, and the Cannonback for that matter, they will roll down this slope, and they will roll right into this corrosive cube and take your Volt Lancer ammo on a merry ride down to the bottom of the pit. That ain't what you want as a Raider. You are now down 2 or 3 shots. That pretty much spells the end of your run. You're going to die to some of the later traps. So, yeah, you have to be careful about that in here. That is the only ammo trap in here, and I will admit I was not planning on the guards being part of that ammo trap. My intent there was to encourage people to use something other than the demolition cannon because it's so effective against the trap setups later. But as it turns out, the Volt Lancer also kind of gets caught by that. And I wasn't super happy with that because really the Volt Lancer is a loadout that I want people to be able to complete this with, and I don't want them to feel discouraged from using it. But it kind of happened, and I'm not going to complain about it too much. Moving on, you will have noticed that there are a couple more guards up here than I actually described, notably these two, the armored ones. And these two have a very special role to play. Like the other Ravager and Enforcer pair, they clip over the corner of this holocube, and then they go on a merry run. But they don't drop down here with the other two. Instead, they drop onto this slope, and it's very important that this is a Ravager and an Enforcer. Hornets and Cannonbacks and Warmongers cannot do this, but Ravagers and Enforcers are short enough that they can travel under this sloped block here, which is also important for a bomb splitter later. And then they can drop through this corner, and they will be in this little corner over here. I haven't talked about this much. We'll get to this corner later. But what they can do is walk down here, they can drop through this holocube down into this pit, they can walk down this area, and they can walk up this slope. A guard cannot walk through a corrosive cube normally without dying. However, because guards are not a full block tall, or even really a half block tall, what they can do is walk up a slope and then through the bottom of a corrosive cube and out the side before they die. So those two guards do that, and they end up on this block. Then they split up. One of them takes a path that way, one of them takes a path this way. The one going in the path this way walks up around this corner. They can avoid that hollow cube there just fine. So the Enforcer takes this path up here and eventually drops off the path right here and then aims back down that way just to provide a little bit of extra threat in case they don't encounter the Raider later. The Ravager, meanwhile, it instead takes the same path over here that we've already covered, and it goes up this slope. So there's a very high chance of the Raider getting flanked in one direction or the other, as long as this holocube gets popped. So that's why we have 2 different traps that can pop the holocube, as well as the Raider being on this block, or jumping in this block. So there are multiple things that can trigger that holocube, and the effects of it are pretty dramatic. So that's the big piece of tech kind of in this first section. That's the biggest deal out here. Now let's go back and take a look at the other path here. This is actually the first bomb splitter in the map. We've got a floor bomb splitter here, we've got a holocube and a bomb trap there. If the Raider is just looking for potential Harvey pathways, they stand a pretty good chance of tripping this thing. If they do, this block here will split half the bombs to go up this path, which stands a fairly high chance of bringing them out here, rolling them down this slope, and out into this hallway. or it will trigger and hit this slope, which bounces over here, which usually the bombs are starting to lose some altitude by then, and they'll fly out and bounce off this block over here, and then kind of fly out into this area. So if you trigger this particular bomb trap, you better not just stand right here, because you are very likely to get a bomb in the face. The only safe spot once you trigger that thing is all the way back over here on this pathway, or up above if you're quick thinking enough to get out, around, and grapple upwards. So even this spot out here has some degree of threat associated with it, and that's mostly a factor because of this particular bomb trap here. We have chaos bombs and spring load on here, which helps eject the bombs with a great deal of velocity. Going a little further up this slope, you can see the edge of that plasma sentinel up there. That serves two purposes. It makes the raider a little nervous when they back up here. Some raiders will just run up the path further when this bomb trap goes off. This makes them reconsider, shall we say. Also, if they speedrun, if they're just going as fast as possible, well, the natural thing to do here is keep running past that. I mean, it's only visible for a half second or so, right? It's not really a true threat. Well, you've got this bolt shot over here, which may or may not trigger. It really has a pretty low chance of killing a raider. But more importantly, if you come up here, well, for one thing, you're not watching for that impaler, and that's going to start triggering and going off. So if you are speedrunning as fast as you possibly can, and you have triggered the plasma sentinel down here, there is exactly enough time for the plasma sentinel to charge a shot by the time you round this corner. That plasma sentinel will shoot right about as you're here, and it will hit you in the face. There's almost no avoiding it. So, yeah, if you're just speedrunning and you're not being very, very cautious and with a shield prepped and ready to go as you round that corner, you're going to die. You're not going to have a good time. Also up here, we have this bomb splitter. And you might be looking at this and thinking, that's not really a bomb splitter, right? It's really just going to do the same thing as this bomb trap over here, just, it throws bombs over this way. Well, yes and no. The top half of the bomb trap is actually going to bounce bombs off that surface. Those bombs are going to bounce down here. This piston is a blockade piston, so it's most likely extended, and that's going to contain the bombs in this section, which will, by the way, direct a good chunk of them out this direction. So some of those bombs have a pretty high chance of coming back out here. Some of those bombs will go down here, and there's a small chance that some of the bombs actually end up dropping through this hole as well. So the bombs really go everywhere, and there's not much of a safe spot unless you are specifically in this little section of hallway here, or this little section of hallway over here. That is a very deadly bomb trap, and if it goes off, which isn't all that common admittedly, you stand a pretty high chance of dying. Over here, for the cautious raiders, we've also, if you shoot that plasma sentinel, you're likely just going to trigger that bolt shot. It does have double down on it, so it is going to fire twice. But then, if you don't want to wait for that, you'll likely shoot that as well, and then you've got 2 ammo over there. Well, you're going to grapple over there and get your ammo back, which is when the incinerator and that bomb trap go off. So you are getting hit from every which way if you actually grapple through that corner to try and get your ammo back. And that piston is extending, so this corner is the only safe spot. Well, there's a laser trap there, and there's some other stuff that we'll get into shortly that is also making that really not fun. You don't want that. It's not a good place to be. So that's pretty much it for both of those pathways. The really fast speedrunners end up having to deal with all of the above. And that is really kind of a trick of this double split opening. When you run past here, you can pretty easily see that there's a pathway over there, but that's the longer pathway. A speedrunner is going to look up there and say, oh, that leads somewhere interesting, and that's where that pathway goes. I'm just going to go up here. And they're going to go up here. And then, if they don't round that corner and take the plasma sentinel shot to the face, well, where is the pathway? Well, there's a path down over here. Oh, I'm back at the start. And now there's explosions going off everywhere. There's corrosion acid going off, or corrosive cube splatter acid, just absolutely everywhere. This thing has likely gone off. The bolt shot's following you. There's bombs, there's explosions, decoration there. There's just all of everything chasing you all over the place. The guards have likely dropped in by the time you get back here, and 2 of them are coming out here, and a bunch of them are up there, and it's just a nightmare. If you take the wrong pathway and go around that loop, you're in for a bad day. But if everything goes perfectly, if you deal with all of that and go forward, well, this is the path forward. Congratulations. Now, what you've got to deal with is these guys. And by the way, I didn't call this out before, but this is a self-destruct piston, so you have a pretty big incentive, even if you blow that piston up and try and run past, you have a pretty big incentive not to stick around in this area. You're going to want to back off, and that lets everything else catch up to you. So a little bit of extra tech on that. So over here, we have another splatter opaque corrosive cube. And there's a couple reasons for that. First of which is this bolt shot over here will coat itself in acid when it fires, so we'll get into that later. But you've also got just a whole bunch of things that can go off over here. This bomb trap over here can actually get bombs all the way up through that cube, which causes splatter down here. It's a real mess if stuff starts going off. There's also a bomb splitter up there. If some of those bombs take a bounce up here and go into the corrosive cube, again, more splatter. It gets all over the place. Not a pleasant place to stand down here. Now this laser over here has a particularly interesting firing arc. If you come up over here, you can just barely see the laser. And that's because your head is higher than your feet. This laser can definitely see you by the time you're standing here. And if you're standing here, odds are that this piston is either extended, in which case the laser can still see you, but you can't see the laser, or it's self-destructing. So again, you can't see through the self-destruct very easily, or you're paying attention to the bright red flashy thing on the wall, and the laser can see you. So very few people will actually destroy that laser before it goes off. Same with the other one, just because it's embedded so far back there. It takes a pretty good shot with a Volt Lancer to be able to take that thing out. So, most people are going to trigger that, see the laser go off, and decide that they can't rush past the burning piston into an unknown area, especially if they've gotten in trouble with trying to rush past the traps in the rest of this area. And what they're going to do is back off. Well, that's a mistake. Now, the positioning of that laser is such that when it charges and fires over towards the Raiders' last known location, as they back around this corner, 100% of the time, it will bounce off the side slope surface of this particular angle block. And then it will bounce off the side slope surface over here. So it bounces a number of times, and it ends up working its way all the way out to here. And yeah, if you've just run past this laser over here and haven't shot that, and then you try and progress past this one, you now have a laser crossfire where you've got this entire hallway covered in laser, a laser beam firing around this corner that you're backing up towards, and a laser coming right across here. So if you back too far over to the right, you get hit by that laser. If you stay where you are, you get hit by the other laser. And if you back up too far, again, you get hit by that laser in the back. So it's really quite a dangerous laser crossfire. And it's caught in, I want to say a few people there. It's not the most deadly trap in here, but it has caught some people by surprise. Also, as I mentioned, I missed painting a surface. Oops. Now I unpainted another surface. Okay, we've got this bolt shot over here. And as you start progressing up this pathway, that bolt shot will trigger. Likewise, if you come through this hollow cube over here out to this point, in order to get a line of fire on that incinerator trap further down the pathway, that bolt shot triggers. Most people, when that bolt shot triggers, are not going to try and progress forwards. They will try and progress backwards, because at that point they've got an incinerator firing down this pathway, they've got a bolt shot coming this way, there's potentially other stuff going off as well, so they're going to back up. Well, they're going to back up, and this thing is going to splatter, and they've got hunter bolts going off around here. And this bomb splitter, if you walk past this dividing line here on this floor tile, will trigger. So you've got even more incentive to be very, very cautious here. There's a high likelihood of some splatter hitting the floor down here from all of this stuff, and it just gets to be a real mess in this area. So this bomb trap here has effectively two different functions. For one thing, if people come up here, and I've seen this happen before, where someone gets up in here and they kill off the Raider ambush before it executes. Great, fine, good. They've disarmed that trap. And while they're up there, they'll likely see this bomb trap and that dart trap, and they'll blow both of those up. And then they want to go exploring because this is obviously a place that they shouldn't be, according to my line of thinking. So they want to, look around a little bit and see where all the things are. They want to see what all these traps are and get rid of them. Well, as they come under this lip, most of them aren't expecting that bomb trap to go off. That bomb trap will bounce bombs off of this wall and that wall, and usually one of them will end up bouncing up here and into this area. And it usually ends up going off right around this corner. And that's enough to kill anyone that doesn't back away to sufficient distance. So even this area up here is not without its little traps. However, the intended path of the bombs is to go down here, where they take several interesting bounces and just kind of fill up this little area in here, and hopefully cause the raider to panic a bit. The bombs can also bounce down here and through this corrosive cube and down here, and what ends up happening here is this piston here is both blockade and burning, and it's going to likely bounce those bombs back into this area. So this entire area here kind of turns into a puddle of death when that goes off. We've also got another couple of paths up there. It can it can do all sorts of nasty things up there. And it can, like I said, deal with raiders that discover this guard ambush early as they're poking their heads through here. So it's got a number of functions that it can do, and even though it's not as deadly as some other bombs in this area, it will very often cause major issues for raiders, or at least keep them moving along and just make sure that they don't have a huge incentive to stick around in this area. Speaking of which, we've got another couple of bomb traps over here. We've got a bomb trap down this pit. Again, this is a chaos bomb and spring load bomb trap. And usually what ends up happening here is those bombs come up this pit, and then they come out here. Well, this angle isn't really going to bounce them around much, but they'll likely have some sort of an angle that carries them out onto this platform. This angle, however, this angle over here will bounce the bomb forwards. And this actually caught the developers of Meet Your Maker by surprise. In one of their recent live streams, they came out here and one of them triggered this bomb trap and then tried to run away up here. And he got about up to here and then got exploded by a bomb that was following him. It had bounced off this surface, off this ramp, and up over here before exploding. So yeah, those bombs can travel way further than you would think from a trap that is set 2 blocks into the floor. Likewise over here, we've got another hollow cube concealing another bomb splitter. This is, again, a chaos bomb and spring load trap. You might notice a theme going on here. Those will bounce around up here. Some of those bombs will hit this surface, and they will bounce around in this area, and they will come back down here. So if the raider is hiding back down here, they're not going to be very successful at that. They're not going to live down there for long. Those at least a couple of those bombs are going to come back towards the bomb trap. However, there's another function up here. While this slope is here, and some of the bombs will likely come up here and may bounce around in this area a little bit, the majority of them will actually hit this slope and then either trigger a splatter off that corrosive cube and or bounce straight this way. Usually, if this bomb trap triggers, it's because someone is rushing past or has come through this area. If they've come through this area, their natural reaction if they're trying to back up is going to be to go this way, unless they've already dealt with the incinerator and piston here, in which case they may go this way. In either of those cases, they will have bombs following them from that trap. So that's generally fairly deadly. Over here, we have a hunter bolt shot trap in the roof. If they try and back around the corner, that will follow them through this corrosive cube, and they're likely to get a nice splatter effect as a follow-up. This incinerator also will kill anyone trying to walk across this line after it's been triggered. So if you are down here and you walk up here and trigger the incinerator, and then decide you don't like the sound of that bolt shot trap going off and try and back away to safety, well, there's only one beam of flame coming out of that incinerator, but it will still catch you and kill you just the same. We also have here a self-destruct and unrelenting impaler, so there is no safe spot to stand in this hallway at all until you've dealt with those traps, unless you set off some of the bomb traps that send bombs out here, in which case you at least have to deal with those bomb traps, but they do stand a pretty good chance of destroying the piston or the impaler or both. This piston here is mostly just to keep people from rushing past this hallway too easily, which you can do if that is not there. with that piston there, you at least have to deal with the incinerator a little bit, even if you're just rushing past at full speed. Okay, and that brings us to the second major trap area out of 3. So moving on to the second hallway. This hallway setup is a very basic V, or inverted V here, where you go up one ramp and then down the other, and you're pretty much out and into the third area. It's very short. However, it takes people usually about as long to get through as the previous area. And that's, well, despite the fact that you can very easily speedrun through all of this, most people tend to engage the traps at least once because it's not exactly obvious what's going on here. This particular area is quite dangerous if you're not accustomed to seeing this layout. This uses a laser setup that a user from the Meet Your Maker Discord and I kind of went back and forth on ideas for. Karstocles from the Discord came up with the general idea of this hallway shape, and I've kind of refined it and added some more traps to it and tried to make it work as best I could. And this setup actually features 2 of those hallways. So this was back when we were kind of theory crafting some laser tech, and I think it worked out pretty well. So what this is doing here is we've got a hallway that goes up this ramp. First thing you encounter is this corrosive cube. It's a splatter corrosive cube and it's opaque. Most people aren't going to grapple through that. It's just too dangerous. This laser up here has yet to do anything significant or kill anyone. It's mostly there to temporarily hold your ammo because every single person that sees that laser trap up there and is equipped with a Volt Lancer shoots it. Every single one, 100% of the time. And that takes away one of your ammo, which makes the rest of the setups a little bit harder to deal with, because there's enough nasty stuff up here that you really don't want to come up here and get your ammo back right away. So, they'll shoot that trap, and then most people come up here and notice something fishy. There's a holocube there, and it's not even a picture-perfect one. Instead, it's Masquerade. And that's weird. A Masquerade holocube is not what anyone is expecting in that particular location. It's just strange. So, why is there a Masquerade holocube there? Well, this goes into an interesting little piece of tech. The Masquerade holocube goes all the way back up into this area, and this little V is exactly on the other side of that Masquerade holocube. And you remember that I said that Masquerade holocubes project their size very slightly beyond the actual edge of the holocube. Well, turns out if you cram a guard's nose into this little V here, and there's a Masquerade holocube on the other side, what ends up happening is the guard gets blocked by the Masquerade holocube, and he gets blocked by that holocube until it's triggered. And that makes this kind of the perfect ambush setup. You have, again, a Ravager and an Enforcer. That's one of my preferred ambush pairs. And they rub their nose against this holocube, and then they drop through here. Again, they can travel underneath this half block here, and then they drop down here. By the point that that holocube is triggered, this thing is dead. There will no longer be a piston here. Basically, every raider under the sun is going to blow this piston up before they get anywhere close to that time frame. So by the time they get up to here, there is a clear path for those 2 guards to chase the raider all the way up here. Now, if the raider did not successfully shoot the bomb trap, they're already going to back down here because, well, there's bombs chasing them. And that's all well and good. But if they do shoot the bomb trap successfully, then they proceed up into this area. Now, this area up here has its own little set of challenges to deal with. The first of those is this particular laser trap back here, and this is kind of a miss on my part. I wasn't real happy with how this laser trap performed. Its intended use case is to go off if the raider walks up this slope, but when I put this bomb trap up here, it very heavily encouraged people to go up here to get their ammo back, and along the way they trip the laser trap. Well, a lot of them never actually go up this ramp normally after that. Most of the raiders will hang around up here, they'll jump down here, and along the way while they're up here, they'll destroy that laser trap because it's very easy to do so. And that was kind of a miss on my part. I don't want that laser trap to die there, I want it to fire when the raider reaches right around here. Because what happens is, this laser is a switched laser. When that laser fires, it hits this block over here. Now, well, sometimes. Okay, so to take this one thing at a time, when that laser fires, it fires mostly because the raider is right around here. If they back down the slope, like say they spin around and say, oh, I can't make that shot easily, or if they just jumped up here to see what was there, and the laser triggers, and then they fall back down to here, well, the raider is likely going to not shoot the trap immediately. And that means that the laser is going to track or seek down to as close to the raider as possible, which is right in the middle of that V, which means that it hits right in the middle of this slope block. So when it hits that, the laser then bounces up to here, which the raider has almost certainly destroyed this trap by that point, so this trap isn't really getting destroyed by that laser bounce. And then it bounces over here, hits this wall, and then it bounces down through this corrosive cube and hits here, and then over to here. Well, that actually is kind of an interesting thing, because by this point, the raider has likely triggered a guard ambush. And when they hit this hollow cube, the other guards from over here are dropped down and start walking up this way. Well, while they're doing that, the raider's likely up in this area. They might aggro this guard. There are 3 guards down there that if they stand on top of this block, they will certainly aggro those guards. Or if they're just slowly progressing up here, eventually they'll get to the point where this cannonback sees them, or those guards see them, or the guards from behind see them. Now, a good chunk of these guards have bloodlust on them. This guard has it, this guard has it, and yeah, this guard has it. So they all have bloodlust up front. So if the guards from behind see the raider, or the guard up here sees the raider, in either of those cases, all of the guards from up front will start progressing towards the raider. So it's very easy to get ambushed in this little bit of hallway here. And there's a cannonback down here, there's an enforcer down here. Both of those are a threat to the raider if they stay up here. And there's a warmonger that is a threat if they stay down here. And if they're down here, the cannonback and enforcer will walk over this ridge. Well, when they're on that side of the slope, the cannonback in particular has Dead Man's Switch on it. So when they shoot that down, it will roll down that slope and hopefully explode on them. Again, that happened to the developers in their live stream when they attempted to play this map. So that is a potentially deadly trap, and it's one that usually catches some people by surprise. Now, another thing I did wrong in that guard ambush is that originally, when I ran this map during the contest, the Builders Contest, I had bloodlust on these guards, and that was a mistake. Because what happens up here is that bloodlust guard is just barely in range of these guards over here. And so if the raider notices this ambush, or in some way triggers the ambush, and then jumps up here to kill the guards, these guards over here aggro because they've got bloodlust. And that's a problem, because what they do then is they sit over here for usually 10 seconds, and then they decide, okay, I can't actually get to the raider, and I can't see them because I'm sitting over here or like up here, usually, and they won't actually be able to shoot at the raider. They can't actually do anything useful, but they're over here usually, or over in this corner. And instead of going back to the last point that they were on their patrol path, they go back to the closest point on their patrol path, which means that instead of rubbing their face back up against that Masquerade hollow cube and resetting, they instead walk over here, and then they follow their patrol path down here, and they will do that well in advance of when they're supposed to. So not only is the raider likely up in this area over here killing these guards, and then they poke their head over here and see those guards drop through and follow their patrol path, well, their patrol path leads them up over here, and then they end up going down this way and over here, and they just kind of peter out over in this area and just kind of stay there. So they'll look back towards this area, but they're really not a threat on their own, and it's just not really an effective use of those two guards. I could have done the patrol path better, or I could have just taken Bloodlust off, which is what I've done now, and they would have both behaved themselves much better. So that was a mistake that I made, and something that should have been corrected before the Builders competition. I just didn't have time to get to it. Anyway, back over to this area. That guard ambush executes. If the raider runs past without actually going up into that area, this bomb trap is likely to trigger, And this actually acts as a bomb splitter again. The bottom half of the bombs will go down this way, the top half of the bombs will bounce off this flat wall, and most of them will then proceed to go down through this corrosive cube and explode down here. That can very much catch some raiders by surprise, and usually the bombs will go off while they're inside this corrosive cube here, which does trigger the splatter, and that splatter will then hit this surface down here because the bombs came in from the top. But it also stands a high likelihood of killing the raider if they're walking around in this area, and it will do so very unexpectedly. There's basically no warning, other than, obviously, the bomb trap having gone off. So the rest of those bombs proceed forward down this pathway and can catch speedrunners. At least that was my thought process. It's a mixed bag as to whether they actually managed to pull that off or not. Oop, that stays there. These two impalers here both have self-destruct and blockade on them. Those are meant to obscure the laser firing pathways, because as you cross over this ridge, something very interesting happens. I mentioned before that this laser can end up going in a big circle around up there, and it can come down here and go over to here. And it does die out at this wall. I was hoping it would bounce down there, but it just doesn't have enough bounces left. It just hits that wall and stops. Still, it is an effective anti-retreat mechanism. What does end up happening, though, is that as you cross over this lip, if you have not destroyed that laser trap yet, the laser aims up slightly. Now, it's not being restricted by this block, and that's very important because a laser that gets restricted by a flat block like this will not actually go past the block. It will hit the backside of the block and reflect up there. That's very important, and it's one of the reasons that if the raider jumped straight up here, that laser tends to destroy itself, which was a bit of a miss on my part there. That could have been done better. However, if the raider crests this ridge and then starts heading back down, that laser can see them as they go over this ridge. So what ends up happening there is the raider actually bounces off this ledge right here, and it does so right at the very tip of it, which means that this laser then goes up here, bounces off this surface, comes down through these corrosive cubes, and bounces off here, and bounces around down here. Whether it will actually do anything productive or not is debatable, but yeah, it will traverse around down here quite a bit, and it can be a real problem for the raider, especially if they don't destroy that laser, which then proceeds to do exactly what this laser did over here when the raider backs around down this area. It, again, if you proceed down this path, will center itself between these two blocks on the V, and then it will bounce off this block, off that block, off this block, through the corrosive cubes, off this block, and then forwards over here. So it's very difficult to run away from that, especially since you won't know where that laser's coming from. If you run past these impalers, these are blockade impalers, and those will obscure the warning indicator on the laser. And what ends up happening with that is the laser will fire off this block, hit that impaler, destroy the impaler, and then continue on its original pathway. At least that's the theory. Basically what ends up happening is the raider can't see the laser coming, and they're supposed to run down here and get tagged by it. I have never actually seen that succeed in catching anyone, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Really, the first reason is that people that are running past everything and coming down here are just moving fast enough that this little 3-block thing is nothing to them. They're going to be up this ramp and into the next section well before that laser goes off. It's not really a huge threat. The other reason being that if this laser bounces off this wall and then this, that is 2 bounces, and then it hits this, and that's a 3rd, and it can go straight back and destroy the laser trap. That's a problem. That is the first tick of damage will still destroy that laser trap, and then the laser's done, and you only ever get this laser back here following you. So it's not as effective as I would have liked it, though it does still catch people who poke their nose over this and then panic at the side of the guard ambush and back down here. So it is still effective, it's just not as effective as I would have liked, and slow raiders will, generally speaking, poke their nose over this ridge, see that laser trap, and then jaunt forward and then shoot the thing. I do have a secondary trap in here, though. If they don't see this hollow cube here, this bomb trap can go off, and it will spread bombs over into this area and through this corrosive cube down here and down into the hallway down here. So it can be quite dangerous to go back in here to retrieve your ammo if you don't catch this first. Most people do, because most of the people who actually shoot this trap are the cautious raiders. And cautious raiders are going to look at this hollow cube and say, okay, everything else is painted. Why isn't that surface painted? Oh, there's a trap back there. And so they're going to destroy that trap, and then they'll just proceed along their merry way. So this was probably a bit of a waste of capacity here and could have been done better. This whole hallway segment in general is a little hard to come up with new ideas for, but yeah, it's just a little bit rough. By the way, I do still have an incinerator up here with Dragon's Breath on it to make sure that it gets down to right around this point in this hallway, so that is a fairly large threat to raiders. And there is a burning piston with blockade up here just to keep people in melee honest. Keeps them from rushing that too easily. So it can also cause the raider to waste ammo up here, which is one of the reasons I wanted this thing up here to waste or temporarily capture ammo. If you don't use your ammo wisely in this section with a Volt Lancer, it is very easy to use a shot there, waste a shot on the piston, and then shoot the flame trap, and then you don't have anything left to deal with that bomb trap or anything else up there, or the ensuing guard ambush. So, yeah, it's a little bit difficult to deal with all of it at once. Moving forward here, we've got another bomb splitter up on the roof, and I do have a piston here. This piston will actually not kill anyone walking at ground level. However, the trick is that most speedrunners do not walk at ground level. They grapple forward, they will grapple to that ramp very happily once they see it, because they don't have to very carefully aim at the floor in front of them. So they'll just grapple right to that ramp, and that will take them off the ground, and then they'll get bonked by the piston. That is a burning piston and blockade piston, so it will very happily smash a raider that is not careful about their pathing there. Of course, it can be destroyed very easily, but the raider can't see that actual trap base, so it's not the easiest thing in the world to destroy. They at least have to think about it a little. Again, there's a bomb trap up here. This splits in 3 directions. Some bombs usually come down through there, though not always. Most of the bombs are either directed down this pathway, where they fall through both of these corrosive cubes and back onto this ramp, which directs them forward. But they usually explode right around the time they touch that surface. And the other bombs tend to go through this corrosive cube, where they will catch anyone trying to recover their bolts from this bolt shot, or anyone trying to rush past up here. It's not perfect, because a very fast raider will likely be around this corner and into safety before the bombs over here go off, but the thinking was that the bombs would land on this surface and then roll out this way so as to catch raiders. It's kind of 50-50 as to whether that works or not. It's not really all that reliable. I was asking those bombs to do too many things, and they just don't have enough travel distance to them. So that was not necessarily a miss on my part. I did get several kills with that bomb splitter, but it's not the most effective trap in the map by a long shot. Likewise, this bolt shot up here never really killed anyone. It's mostly just there to make you cautious and make you focus your attention up there right around the time when this bomb splitter can see you. So that was of debatable usefulness, and I probably should not have wasted the 15 capacity for Hunter on that bolt shot. Then we get into this section. This is the third section and one of the most interesting ones. This particular section has a lot of corrosive cubes over here. Alright, well, the Raiders seen corrosive cubes, and they've seen splatter over here. They know exactly what's coming. So they poke their nose through here. There's a bomb trap up above. Okay, well, that's easy enough to see and disarm. You just go up there and shoot it or hit it with a sword. The bomb splitter, if it does go off, is pretty lethal. It can drop bombs down there into that corrosive cube. It can drop them down here. Interestingly, when they hit this corrosive cube, this is splatter for a couple of reasons. When they hit this thing, the splatter will go up back into this pipe and then straight down and land there. However, that gives you a danger indicator that is the same danger indicator that a bomb has, which comes in handy for the next trap, which is a bomb trap right there. And this bomb trap is particularly interesting because either you're focusing on that bomb trap and sneak around the corner to be able to shoot it, in which case those 2 lasers down there can see you, or you rush around the corner and hit it with a sword or something, in which case those 2 lasers can see you. Now, those lasers seeing you is particularly interesting. And I should also note here that if you do actually let this bomb trap go off, this is a really nasty bomb splitter. Because what happens here is these bombs half of them tend to hit this wall and travel this way. So they send bombs out usually right about here before they explode. And some of them almost always end up going through this corrosive cube, bouncing off this wall, and back through here. Also, they trigger splatter, which makes this area uninhabitable. So then you've got bombs back in here. Likely, if this bomb trap has gone off, those two lasers have fired, which we'll get into in a moment. But those also add threat back here. So there's all sorts of stuff going on there, and that bomb trap acts kind of as a multifunction thing. It's both a lure to draw people over here or push them out here to shoot the thing, and it also, if you're not being cautious, it can cause this bomb trap to trigger. And it also kind of puts the Raider in a position where some or at least a couple of these lasers are going to start firing. So, the lasers. The lasers are an interesting one, and I was very torn on these. The entire concept of the hallway is predicated on those lasers. The entire architecture and geometry in here is entirely devoted to these lasers. Everything else in here was kind of done as a secondary trap to draw your focus away from the 4 lasers. These 4 lasers, you might think they're positioned right next to each other. They're all going to do pretty much the same thing, but that is not the case. Each one of these 4 lasers actually does something entirely different. If you step up on this pathway, this bottom left laser over here will see you. If you back around this corner, this is a flat surface, and the laser is seeing you almost directly at the midpoint of this block. When lasers see you exit a pathway, they will over-rotate towards a flat edge like this, and when that happens, the laser bounces off this surface, which sends it through this corrosive cube. This corrosive cube then leads you to this corner. This corner then bounces through this corrosive cube, and that laser ends up bouncing over here and bouncing up to that block. So you've got a laser bouncing over here, and all of these lasers have the over-amplify mod, so they have 4 total bounces. So you've got 1 there, 2 here, 3 here, and 4 there, and then this laser bounces back and usually ends up hitting this surface of this prism here somewhere else, because it's not got a perfect angle. And where exactly that is changes a teeny tiny little bit from Raider to Raider, but generally speaking, if that laser fires, it's making this area out here, it's making this area out here, and it's making several areas in this block basically uninhabitable. This laser up here is very similar. However, it comes down at more of an angle. And what's interesting about that is it tends to lose track of the Raider in a slightly different way. And I haven't figured out exactly what causes this, but generally speaking, that laser ends up bouncing at a different angle through here, and it will, well, I know exactly what causes it. It takes pretty much the same path off this wall, but it is going at a very slightly different angle, and that comes back over here. So what ends up happening with that is that laser ends up angling upwards further, and so that tends to, it also has a slightly more oblique angle as it goes through all of those bounces. So that bounces around back here, but it does so in a significantly different path than the lower left laser. And it's kind of hard to describe, but it basically can end up forming kind of a pattern back here that is fairly hard to evade. The alternative to that is if the laser sees the Raider right here, and it's that one specifically that tends to do this. If the Raider does not back away from this corner quickly enough and that laser locks in, it can hit this surface over here and bounce over here and bounce off this surface and go back here. So that ends up being a 1 reflection, 2 reflection, 3 reflection, 4 reflection, and then it comes back over here. So that ends up being, well, usually it doesn't end up going all the way back through that corrosive cube. It bounces off either the floor or the ceiling back here, somewhere along that path. So it ends up going all over the place back here, meaning that if both of those lasers fire, this area back here is nearly uninhabitable. There is no safe spot back here. These 2 lasers, also these 2 lasers have the ability to see back here. And what they do over here is something totally different. This laser fires over here, tends to bounce off this wall, or off this wall and then off the back wall and through over here. So that ends up bouncing around back here. Again, the path is fairly unpredictable. It depends on whether the raider backs out of here quickly enough or whether it locks in while the raider is still standing here. And this laser, again, pretty much the same thing. And this laser also can trigger if the raider noses too far forward here, or if they stand like right in this area, that laser will trigger and it will start firing through here. So you can have up to 3 lasers firing through here. Most of those end up going through that corrosive cube. The ones that don't end up bouncing off this wall, bouncing off that wall, and then they can either bounce around in here a little bit, sometimes they end up bouncing back here, sometimes they end up bouncing over here and through this corrosive cube and making this area uninhabitable. It gets to be a real mess. This hallway can become dangerous, really depending on which of these lasers are left alive. Different areas basically become uninhabitable. So the raider has a lot of incentive to kill those lasers. And usually they end up using either a grenade or all 3 shots from a Volt Lancer or something to try and do that. Or just using the arc barrier and letting the lasers shoot them directly and trying to reflect the shots. Those are all valid options here. If they use the arc barrier, they usually leave themselves vulnerable to these 2 guards, which aggro and attack them immediately as they start moving forward to finish cleaning up over here. So this Ravager in particular is quite sneaky. It has a pretty good line of sight over most things that go on down there. So if you try and proceed past this bomb trap in any way, that Ravager will see you, and it will stand up here and shoot at you. And when it gets down to this block, it has an excellent line of sight. It will shoot down in that side, it will shoot down on this side, it will shoot you all the way over to these traps. It really will, yeah, it's nasty. It will chase you down to here, and then it will kill you unless you kill it first. So very deadly Ravager there. That actually accounts for more than half of the kills in this entire area. Likewise, we've got a cannon back up there, and that's as much a distraction as anything. It does get some kills, but people tend to panic when they hear cannonballs going off and get the warning indicator, which they do get the warning indicator when they're almost anywhere in this room because the cannonball tends to land right there. Raiders tend not to inhabit the spot along here, so the cannonball is not actually dangerous to them. But when they're standing right here, they're still getting that warning indicator, and they usually don't know where it's coming from because they can't see either the cannon back or the cannonball at that location. Usually they'll come out here, trigger it as they're trying to clean up the lasers, because the cannon back can see them there. But the cannonball will bounce around back there and not really be a huge threat. It doesn't get many kills. It's only gotten really ever a couple of kills back in this area. But all the same, that cannon back is doing its job just by making the raiders play more cautiously, which tends to make them more vulnerable to both the Ravager and all of the other stuff in this room. So it's doing its job even though it's not really getting kills itself. Over here, we basically just have an anti-rush setup. We've got a couple of pistons down here. We have a laser down here. Now, my original thinking with this laser was that it would fire up here and go after you if you tried to destroy that bomb trap. Or if you tried to skip past and go after the incinerator over here with a melee weapon, the laser ends up having a very interesting bounce pattern where it hits the top edge of this block, reflects over here, and kind of does a little weird bouncy thing that goes back and up and around, and that laser ends up actually following you into this block. I never actually saw anyone even close to getting hit by that. It just never happened. But in my testing, several times, when I went after this incinerator in melee, that laser from down there ended up doing all sorts of weird bouncing and coming up after me when I went to kill that incinerator in melee. It was just a really neat effect that I really hoped someone would see. Turns out basically no one did, but it was fun. I had fun making it. So it's worth it. Over here, we've got a little pit. This is not nearly as effective of an ammo trap as the one near the front door, but in general, it does its job well enough, and it's mostly there to trap grenades because by this point, basically everyone has switched off of the demo cannon. No one really bothered to take the demo cannon all the way through this map. But if you did have a demo cannon at this point and you land a grenade right along here, it takes out all 4 of these lasers way too easily, and that's something I wanted to avoid. The same with the thrown grenade. So this little gap down here makes sure that those tend to roll down here, or they hit this slope and start rolling down here. so the grenades and explosives are much less likely to take out the whole cluster at the same time. Likewise, this functions as a very effective ammo trap over here because people are highly incentivized to shoot these 4 lasers with something that requires ammo. Well, the Volt Lancer, really. So, people tend to approach this area much less cautiously. The incinerator provides a lot of threat and covers these traps fairly well. So this little plasma sentinel over here, despite not having great firing angles, both acts as an anti-rush trap because you can't really make your way past both those pistons and that laser, and the incinerator, and avoid those bombs, and get rid of the plasma sentinel. You just can't do it all at the same time. So, a really good raider that is extremely fast and is using 2 weapons will be able to shoot or cut both of these things just in time to get down here before the bombs explode, and they'll be able to outrun the bombs. That is very rare, though. I've only ever seen a couple of people do it, and those people are extremely good speedrunners, so it's generally not something that happens a whole lot. So in general, this functions as a fairly effective anti-speed run, and it tends to make people cautious down here, which is really all I was going for there. I wanted those lasers to fire at least once, and wanted to let people see all the funky patterns they make back here, if nothing else other than, or for no other reason than just to give people ideas. It is not really all that deadly. If I switch on all markers, death markers back here, this is not all the people that have died back here. The death markers only count the last X number of raids. I don't know what that number is specifically, but yeah, you can see here that there's only been really a few deaths back here. Not really a huge killer of a zone. Not nearly so much as that area back towards the start, but it's gotten its share of kills, and yeah, it makes people go back through the entire back area unless they're using a Phoenix pod, which is the area that's much more likely to get kills. So it does its job reasonably well, and I didn't want to make it too terribly challenging, because dying near the end of a long level like this can really frustrate raiders. I already had a higher than normal percentage of quitters on this one, and I just didn't want to make that any worse. So yeah, while this will slow you down, it's slowing you down in an area that's not likely to kill you too much, and it's just a clever trap setup that I kind of wanted to show off. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I've got to say about that one. Oh, this laser down here did end up underperforming in one key way, and that's if you see that laser go off and you back up around this corner. One of these pistons is actually, yeah, this guy here, a blockade piston. And if the laser hits that piston, it reflects straight back where it came from, and that blows up both the piston and the laser. Kind of a miss on my part. That was not intended to be that way, but it's kind of how it worked out. But yeah, that was a mistake on my part, and I probably should have taken another method to slow down speedrunners. Anyway, once you're around that corner, you are home free. Oop, pardon. Once you get to the gen mat here, you pick that up, this hollow cube turns passable, and you are out. That's the end of the level. So that's pretty much it. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you want me to do more deep dive type reviews of maps like this. This is a format that is a little more prone to me rambling on about various different things, so it's a little less structured and a little more, yeah, a little more likely for me to just talk too much. So hope you enjoyed, hope I wasn't too rambly, and let me know if you want to see more of this type of video in the comments, and I hope I'll see you next time.